let's talk about Masters of the Air episodes 1 and 2. I think the episode titles are just part 1, part 2, right? If I'm right about that. So I will read the plot summary of these episodes from the show descriptions. Part 1, led by Majors Clevin and Egan, the 100th Bomb Group arrives in England and joins the 8th Air Force's campaign against Nazi Germany. And in Part 2, the 100th bombs German U-boat pens in Norway with the help of Lieutenant Crosby's navigating a damaged B-17 struggles to get back to Britain. So that's what happens in the first 2 episodes of the show. But Patrick Klepek, let's start by talking about whether or not you think, in a sentence or a couple sentences, people should watch this show.
I feel like I might have tipped my hand earlier when I said Squid Game, a show that manages to have a compelling roster of characters, a large ensemble, and balance that with spectacle. Because I don't think Masters of the Air pulls it off. I struggle to name many of the characters in the show. The show has a funny moment early on where it says, "Oh, some of these 2 main characters are Bucky and Buck," and you know what? They might as well all be Bucky and Buck to me.
I was going to say Bucky and Buck are the only 2 characters who I can confidently identify. I'm not 100% sure which one is which, but also, but they point out, wait, so what? You're Bucky and you're Buck. They say that like 3 times during the show. So those are the only names that I really remember.
Yeah, and it's a massive disappointment for me because Band of Brothers, this is the third in a series of sort of Spielberg, Tom Hanks collaborations about World War II, starting with Band of Brothers, going to the Pacific, and then now with Masters of the Air. Those previous 2 shows were on HBO, this on Apple TV+. I didn't watch the Pacific. I don't have a good reason for it. It just kind of went by me. But Band of Brothers was a defining television show for me when I was younger. It's the first box set I bought on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K. I just continued to want to have a box of that show in my house. It means a lot to me because I thought it did a wonderful job of balancing spectacle and characters and heart. And this show I just have trouble connecting with. It has some interesting set pieces, some potentially interesting characters, but I find myself drifting moment to moment in a way that I think cuts to the heart of what the show is trying to do, which is depict air fights. And I think air fights are fundamentally difficult to convey character drama. And so then you're relying on the spectacle alone because you can't connect to the characters as well. And it just kind of has fallen flat for me in a way that I'm profoundly disappointed about for the expectations and excitement I had for the show. But what did you make of it?
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty mixed on this show. Not bad, not a terrible show. You know, there's some shows we watch that are like pretty rough. Better than Twisted Metal, you know.
Put it on the box.
But I think everything you said is accurate. I think that the show really struggles to ground the perspective in anyone that the audience really cares about. There is a lot of action in the show. You know, it's telling, Patrick Klepek. We watched the first 2 episodes of Expats this week as well, which we're going to cover next. That is a show where much less stuff happens than in Masters of the Air. But I think that we both found a bit more engaging because at least I think you understand each of these characters. And also I think Expats looks a lot better than the show. So overall, I would say I'm in the same boat as you. I didn't really love this show that much. I'm not really feeling that motivated to continue it. And in fact, we will not be, we probably won't continue to cover the show in any meaningful way. Yeah. So those are my overall thoughts. I will say one other thing. The biggest problem for me with this show is that I think the visual effects are unconvincing. Now, people have different mileage. Like I've seen some reviews where they say the visual effects are incredible, and that's fine. Like, you know, enjoy your experience. I'm not trying to take away from it. But at no point did I believe that these people were in planes in the air, shooting or dogfighting or whatever the term is during World War II. And that is not a statement I can make of other shows. Like, for instance, Dunkirk, Christopher Nolan's movie, like that. I definitely believe they went up and did that stuff. There's a movie, I think, with Jonathan Majors and Glenn Powell called Devotion that I watched recently on Paramount Plus, where I think it's World War II and people flying planes, and it's like I believed that those people were up there flying planes. Like the way it's shot, the way visuals are used, so much of this show takes place in the air that you really need to believe that they're up there. And I honestly feel like the graphics look like PS4, PS5 graphics of like these planes flying in the air. Like,
Uh-huh.
all the stuff on the ground looks amazing. Like the sets, the vehicles, the wardrobe, it all looks really convincing. But the stuff in the air, whenever they cut to it, I'm just like, oh, there goes my immersion in the show. Like I feel like it doesn't look quite right to me.
Well,
So
and I think that's exaggerated by the lack of connection to the characters, right?
mhm,
Because your suspension of disbelief with visual effects is like, especially when the visual effects alone can't do the heavy lifting to like put you in a place, then it's in a direct relationship with your ties to the characters. And I think that's where the show ends up really faltering. There are some truly spectacular and awe-inspiring sort of action sequences in which many times a character would die, but I can't tell if they're one of the characters in the show. You know what I mean? Like, is this an
right,
ensemble character? Am I supposed to be sad right
right,
now?
right,
Or is
yeah,
this just, hey, we're depicting how brutal, like there's, you see this a lot
right,
in war films, right? Like there are the characters we're following that have some measure of plot armor to, so that we have a story to follow. And then there are people who have squibs on and they're going to die so that we can convey the horror of war. And this show, when they would get into the air, I had trouble navigating who I'm following, who I'm anxious about, so that when like truly amazing, violent, upsetting sequences would happen in which a character would be peppered with bullets from a German warplane or something would explode, it would I would have to have the characters then later inform me who died or who didn't die.
right.
And I think those things end up making those sequences so much worse, where it's not just the visual effects taking you home, it's also, I don't know what the emotional stakes are for me and what I'm watching. And I think that just makes both problems worse.
Absolutely, absolutely. Uh, you're basically wondering when someone dies. You're wondering, should I care about that? Which is not a great place to be in the show. And I think it's difficult because a lot of these people are wearing masks
Yeah.
while they're in the air. Their outfits are similar, and so the show I don't think does that much to distinguish between them. Or it's not that it doesn't do that much. It hasn't done enough for us.
Yeah.
Put it that way. So those are our overall thoughts on Masters of the Air, a show that we were both looking forward to for different reasons. Patrick, because of his attachment to Band of Brothers. Cary Fukunaga directed the first couple episodes. Like super talented director who's directed True Detective and No Time to Die and a bunch of other things. So like somebody whose work I really admire. And unfortunately, it's very difficult for me to recommend this show. I will say, if you're really into World War II stuff, right? If you're like a diehard World War II fan, like definitely, I think the show is worth checking out. But we found the drama a little bit lacking for the reasons that we've discussed. Now, there's a couple of other things I want to mention about what happens in these episodes, Patrick Klepek. First of all, we spent a lot of time talking about what the show doesn't do well. Probably we should talk about what the show does do well. And there's a
Mhm.
couple things I think it does do well. First of all, despite the fact that it's hard to tell who these people's names are or tell them apart while they're in the air, I think the cast is actually pretty great. I
Yeah.
think like Austin Butler, very talented, very charismatic, kind of we just saw him in Elvis, but he's clearly like, oh, I believe that's a very believable leader of a people. I can understand people wanting to follow that man into battle and potentially die for him. Like makes complete sense. And rest of the cast very talented. So like, there's a lot of great things about the cast. I think, despite how I think the air stuff looks, the practical stuff is actually really great. Uh, there is a lot of texture to what it's like to be in a plane that high decades ago that's you're supposed to be able to shoot munitions out of. And for instance, like there's one scene where like this guy is trying to adjust his weapon, or the gun is jammed or something, and he tries to like adjust it, and he touches it and he gets burned because it's so cold, because he's so high up in the sky. that it's like negative 22 degrees or whatever up there, and so if there's like a crack in the glass or whatever, it's like you will freeze to death or your weapons will freeze. And I love those like little details of like, oh wow, this is physically taxing and treacherous to do what these guys did, just in the normal function of daily activities. And on that note, I will also add that one of the things I really liked was in the 2 episodes we've seen, a lot of bad things happen even when they're not doing the actual mission. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like on the trip on the trip back from, like, we're doing a test run, like somebody I think dies during a test flight, right? Like, and so there's a lot of just like ambient risk at all times of being in this situation that I think the show does a really good job of conveying, right? Like you don't even need to be like actively bombing the enemy. You're just like literally on your way there and something terrible happens to your plane, and then the next thing you know, you're in a terrible situation, So I thought those were all really nice touches to the show that I thought were worth praising. Patrick Klepek, any reaction to any of that?
Well, there's kind of a clever trick the script does for the first episode where, when they're signing up to be part of sort of like, the Air Force component of the war, it's like they describe the like some of the initial flights they're going to go on as observational flights, and certainly that suggests like, I'm in a plane, I'm looking around, and
Right.
the kind of the whiplash of like what an observational flight actually might mean, which could mean heading into an airspace full of flak that's being like shot at you that could take down. You could be on a mission where well, there's just too much cloud cover, and while we've just lost dozens of people, I guess we should turn around and go home. I think the show, I think my disappointment stems from not connecting to the characters more, because I think the broader setup it has, what Band of Brothers has always tried to convey. If there's a through line between Band of Brothers, Pacific, and Masters of the Air, it is trying to convey the meat grinder aspect of war, in which you are showing up to something in which you are almost assuredly not going to come out. Even if you do come out of it, you will not be the same. You will be traumatized. You could be physically disabled, and most likely you're going to die. And like those are the stakes for all of these shows. And my understanding is the Pacific is the most horrendous of the three, because the situation was the most horrendous of the three. But I do think the show is successful in establishing that. For every moment that I was having trouble finding myself navigating the characters and who I wanted to be following, who I was interested in, the moment it started establishing sort of like the wartime stakes and like what these young kids were being thrown into, I found that to be very harrowing and interesting. And that is where the amount of practical work, it's again, I think I described it to you in private as this fits the veneer of a lot of Apple TV stuff, for better and worse, which is extremely expensive and often boring. And then sort of your interest with the material kind of decides where you sort of like, I think Monarch for you is an extremely expensive, often boring show. And I had a wonderful time with it. And I think there's a lot of material on Apple TV that falls into that category. And I think this is one of those. But when it gets to sort of establishing that baseline through line for this show of, imagine how horrific it was to be to step into these shoes as these people. Like that part of it worked for me. And I just wish the rest of it elevated me to a place where I was fully emotionally invested. But just as a showcase for sets and design, I mean, look, if you want to put on a show that you kind of want to just, again, I'm not trying to be condescending and like describing this, but like having it on in the background where you can just check in and then luxuriate with like what's been built here. Like it's gorgeous to look at. It's too dark. I don't know how to maybe you can describe this better for me, but it has that tendency in a lot of modern streaming shows of like, I wish someone would turn on a light. Like it's just dark in general in a way that I don't quite understand. It's just kind of lit oddly in a way that I notice in a lot of streaming shows. But I would clock back in and it's just, you see the money on the screen in a way that is very, very impressive. And the way it recreates a lot of the stuff that's on the ground, like you said, I had a great time with, and it's very visually arresting, and I wish the characters caught up.
I will say it has an epic opening credit sequence. Is this it's been I'd never watched Band of Brothers. I didn't see the Pacific. Is this similar in style to the Band of Brothers opening credits?
Yes, it is I don't know what they're calling this trilogy, but like of the Spielberg Hanks World War II television series over the last 20 plus years, it speaks to the fact that Apple released the credits as like a promotional thing.
Right.
It was like, here are the credits to Masters of the Air, because that like having
Well,
it
it also
long, it's really
reveals
long.
scenes. It's like 2 minutes long,
Yeah.
and it reveals scenes from the entire show. So, like,
Hmm.
spoilers for future episodes of the show. But anyway, epic opening credits. A couple of other things I just wanted to call out. There is a bicycle race that happens in the show where like the men are blowing off steam before like a mission, and that was an incredible sequence. I thought the way it was shot, like the camera's following the bike through this like very narrow space, and I don't know, I just thought it was like, oh, what a nice, lovely sequence of them racing bikes. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. And then Barry Keoghan's in the show, and he's great as usual. And I just thought it was very amusing because Barry Keoghan is Irish, I believe, right?
Hmm.
And he plays somebody from Boston, I think, or New York, who is also I'm pretty sure it's Boston, who is also Irish, but he has a Boston accent in the show. And I will say that his accent is actually excellent. I grew up in and around Boston. I have heard a lot of terrible Boston accents in my life on film, and Barry Keoghan has one of the best Boston accents I have heard. And it's just funny that he is also he like says he's Irish in the show, and he's Irish in real life, but he's from Boston in the show. So anyway, that was just a weird thing I wanted to point out. But Barry Keoghan's also always excellent, and
Oh, I
he's great
mean,
in the show.
if anything, that was like the only exaggerated my disappointment. Was like, whenever this weirdo shows up in something, like I know I'm honest. And the bits that he's great. Like he is great in the show. And every time he's not there, I'm asking,
Mhm.
where is the little weirdo? Put him back on screen. And the other thing I noticed was Steven Spielberg's son is in the show.
Mm.
Not I think only in a couple episodes, not a main character necessarily, but Spielberg's children are like starting to sort of appear in different Hollywood productions, and
Mm.
I thought it was interesting that his son shows up in this one.
Yeah. I liked the kind of conflict slash dynamic between the British soldiers and the U.S. soldiers, and they really did a good
Hmm.
job of casting both of those groups of people.
Yeah, they
It's
did.
like, oh, that's the most American group of people I know, and then like, oh, that's an extremely British group of people, and you kind of get a sense of, hey, yeah, we defeated the Axis during World War II, but it was like a coalition of all these people who are like so different, right? That came together to make it happen. So anyway, I probably should have opened with a lot of these things that I liked about the show, but overall, because I think it sounds like I'm way more positive on it than Patrick. Like
Hmm.
there's many things about the show that I liked, but ultimately it didn't quite succeed in getting me to care about these characters or really getting me thrilled about a lot of these air sequences. I think that also I'm going to call this out. The use of voiceover narration, I think, is kind of disastrous. Like I don't know what they're trying to do with the voiceover, because like
Fill in the emotional gaps of the show that you don't have. Like, I mean,
like you start the voiceover is like the guy who is getting airsick, right? Like
Mhm.
he's the guy who's doing the voiceover, and then it's like, and then the voiceover just vanishes for like vast portions of time, and then new voiceovers come in, and I'm just like, I, if the point of the voiceover is to make me feel really attached to the character who is doing the voicing over, I think it failed. Like it just didn't succeed at a very basic task of voiceovers. So that was also kind of weird and disappointing. So anyway, yeah, these are all part of the same problem, which is like getting you to be attached to these characters, getting you to care about the characters. Unfortunately, I don't think the show really achieved that. So
And you haven't seen Band of Brothers, and so I think your impulse here should be: don't watch Masters of the Air episode 3 if you have the inkling. You need to at some point watch If I will watch Squid Game, then I need
Yeah.
to get David to watch Band of Brothers.
Indeed.
And then we'll meet in the middle.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.